time for us to begin our class tonight. We're going to be studying in a brand new book. We finally finished our study in Philemon, which took several months to do. And now we're going to begin the book of Hebrews. And you'll need a copy of the outline. I think I got a copy of the outline to everyone, but if you don't have a copy, just raise your hand and we'll make sure you get a copy of the outline. If it took us 3 months to go through Philemon, somebody's already asked me how long it's going to take to go through the book of Hebrews, and my answer was, I'll be dead.
But 4 years, 3 hours, Revelation, isn't it?
There's no reason to be ugly. So I'm looking forward. I'm excited about this book. We planned to study the book of Hebrews before COVID started with Dylan teaching the class on Sunday morning, and through the providence of God and the process of time, that didn't work out. And I said last week that I felt like I got cheated out of the book of Hebrews. So we're going to study the book of Hebrews verse by verse, phrase by phrase. I'm not in a hurry to get through this, as you already know, but I think for us as Bible students, it's much more advantageous to us to take our time and really understand what the scriptures say and how they apply and what they mean to them and what they mean to us, and how we can use this information to better ourselves than it is just to hurry through it and put a check mark on another book that we studied. So hopefully you're ready to study. Hopefully you're ready to really get into the text and see what it says and see the application of those things as well. Mike Miller's going to direct us in a word of prayer before we get into the class.
Almighty Father, as we gather here this evening, we give thanks to you for this time we have to come together and study your word. We ask you to be with Jim as he directs our mind in the study of Hebrews. We look forward to this study. May it be beneficial to us. We will learn and put these things to use in our life and share with others. We ask prayer on those that are not with us, maybe are sick and not feeling well. We ask you to be with them, that they may rejoin us at the next opportunity. We ask you to be with us now and forever. These things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So, the study of the book of Hebrews is going to be, at least in my opinion, more important to us in our modern day world than even it was to them who received it in the first century, because the book of Hebrews deals with the idea of false teaching, the idea of legalism and liberalism in the Church of Christ that the writer's writing to. So with the problems we have in our world today, with the liberalism that's rampant in our country, with the legalism that we even have in this neck of the woods here in our Central Florida, this is going to be a book that we can use immediately. These things are going to be applicable to us as we study them. So whoever wrote this, and a lot of people think Paul wrote it. If you think Paul wrote it, that's okay. I'm not going to try to deal with who wrote the book. That's a subject we can discuss over lunch if you want to buy me lunch. But we're not going to take the time in class to discuss who wrote it and who didn't write it. Rather, we've got 13 chapters before us and 303 verses. I'd much rather discuss what the writer wrote than who wrote the information that we have. So if you've got an opinion on that, I'd love to talk to you about it, but let's not do it in the class so that we take away from the time that we have in this discussion. If you're on Team Paul, that's fine with me. I think there's better things to talk about than that. So let's get started here at the beginning. God speaks to us today through his Son. So we're going to read the first 3 verses of Hebrews chapter 1, and then we'll get into a discussion of those things that are mentioned there. But Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 1, inspiration begins this way. God, who at sundry times in diverse manners spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down on the right hand of the majesty on high. Just the beginning of this book, just the way that it begins, is remarkable in and of itself. I have here in the outline, note there's no other book in the Bible that begins with Theos or Elohim. Genesis 1:1 and John 1:1 come close. Now those two words, one is Greek and the other is Hebrew. One is the Greek form of God, Theos, and the other is the Hebrew form of God, Elohim. No other book begins the way the book of Hebrews begins. So that sets it apart. All we got to do is get to the first verse, and it sets this book apart as being something very special to the student, to you people that really want to know what it says. There's no other place we can go to that has this kind of beginning. In the beginning, God, which is the way Genesis starts and the way John starts. In the beginning, God, but this starts with the word God, nothing before it whatsoever. Then I have here in A1, at sundry times means various times, or it literally means in many parts. If you were to look at the word in the original, it would say the meaning is of many parts. Before God refers to the mercy and salvation through Jesus Christ, which was gradually revealed in fragments. So we're going to see in the Old Testament a lot of information that is shared, but it's not shared in here's a essay or here's a list of things that God has done in order to prepare the human mind for these events. He gives a little piece here and a little piece here and another little piece here, and we 21st century Christians have the advantage of being able to go back and put it all together, to combine it all, which they didn't have that ability. So we can see how it might have been pretty difficult for them, or even confusing to them, to take some of these prophecies that were made, or some of this information that was shared, and for them to put it together in a reasonable fashion where they could see, or they could say, oh yeah, I see what you did there. I see what you're preparing for us there. I see how this is going to work together because of what you did or what you gave us or that information. So we have a real advantage over the things that they were going through in the long ago. And I'll just look at number 2 here, or the second one here. God did not reveal all truth at one time under the old covenant. We sometimes have a difficult time grasping the concept of the different laws that were given and the different instructions that were taught, and how they lived under certain portions of the Old Testament and how they lived differently under other portions of the Old Testament. We sometimes, people today, I don't mean you as Bible students, but sometimes people today have a very difficult time trying to separate or isolate those things in such a fashion that it makes sense for them. But it says here under B, it was revealed or released part by part over thousands of years. And not only part by part, but one of the things that struck me today as I was preparing for this is not only was it given part by part, but it was given most of the time very privately. A person would receive a tidbit of information, a nugget of gold from God about prophecy or events that were going to take place, and they might have been the only person that had that information, or it might have been limited to just a few people in a household. Just think back, if you would, to the prophecy given to about Eve back in Genesis chapter 3. Only 2 people heard that prophecy about the Satan's head's going to be bruised by her seed. Nobody else was there to hear it. It's recorded for us, and we all know it. But that piece of information, that nugget of gold that God gave us all the way back at the beginning of the Bible, was something that very few people knew about, or no one knew about, if they didn't take the time to share that information with the next generation or the other people that would come along after them. So it required word of mouth transportation from one, or communication rather, from one person to another. So God did this in a lot of different ways, which we're going to get at, but he did it sometimes privately or in a very limited way to people, and they had to share these things. And see, there is the information I was just trying to share. It's hinted at in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, which is commonly referred to as the very first prophecy of the coming Messiah, or the scheme of redemption that God had in his mind from the foundation of the world. That's the first time we get a glimpse of what God had prepared for us. Back after Eve fell to the temptation of Satan and then got her husband to go along with her and those things, this is the first glimpse that we have that God has a plan to get us out of the trouble that we got ourselves into. And then P here, later to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. So let's go to Genesis chapter 12. Mike Williams, would you read Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3 for us, please?
Now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, I will bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all families of the earth shall be blessed.
Okay, so God gave Abraham information about what was going to happen to his offspring. Now, try to put your mind in Abraham's sandals in the long ago. Genesis chapter 12, God gives him information about something that's going to happen to future generations that would be his. Nobody else knew that but him. And if he didn't share it with people, nobody else would have known it. So we have our advantages in our modern day world with having the entire Bible, the books of the Bible bound up in one volume that we have easy access to. It truly is remarkable the advantage that we have over what they had to deal with in the long ago. Abraham was promised an entire nation was going to come through him. And as far as we know, he was the only one that knew it, unless he shared it with someone. He was the only one that had that information. If someone else had it, we certainly aren't told about it, at least not at the beginning. And then E, perpetuated through many of the prophets. And we know that there were a large number of prophets. In fact, Jesus mentions in Matthew chapter 11 that there was a bunch of prophets that prophesied all the way through John the Baptizer. Let's go to, I think it's John chapter 11. No, let's go to Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11. I'm thinking of Matthew chapter 11 and verse 13, I think, yes. And this is just an indication of the number of prophets. Of course, it's not giving us a number, but it's the multiplicity of prophets. For all the prophets in the law prophesied until John. So we can go all the way back to Abraham's time, and we're going to see in a minute that he was the first one called a prophet. But all the prophecies concerning what God had in store for mankind was carried through all the prophets, all the way up to John the Baptizer, which is what Jesus is talking about in that place. Now, point number 2, under at sundry times, and it says, and diverse manners, or if you use the New King James Version, it says various ways. And this is referring to his plan, or our plan for salvation, the idea of us having the opportunity to be saved from our sins, founded in God's scheme for our redemption that was established before he ever made man, all the way back in the beginning. He put these things in place. So we see in the Old Testament, we as students see in the Old Testament, types and shadows of things that were going to take place. But again, it would be difficult for those people in the old days to be able to see what the types and the shadows mean. They would see the types and the shadows, but they wouldn't be able to look into the future and say, oh, I see how that's going to work out 3,000 years from now or 2,000 years from now. I see how that's going to unfold then. They would only see what was in front of them. Again, your advantage is monumental when you start thinking about it from their perspective. I'm just amazed that they were able to do the things that they were able to do with the knowledge that they had at the time, because we've got so much more information, and still we often fail to do what we're supposed to do. And many of them did the best they could with what they had. So it truly is an amazing thing when we start putting it all together. Now, these diverse manners, or these various ways that were exposed, we're going to look at some of these. I think I've got 7 of them listed here that all begin with the expression sometimes. So sometimes God revealed information for them in dreams. Sometimes it was revealed in dreams. For example, Joseph in Genesis 37, verses 5 and 9. Genesis 37, 5 and 9. Sandra, would you read those 2 verses for us, please?
And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brethren, and they hated him yet more. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it to his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obedience to me.
Okay, so Joseph dreamed a dream. God was giving him information about how things were going to unfold sometime in the future, yet he was the only one that received that information. His brothers were involved in it, his parents were involved in it, but he was the only one that received it, and what he shared with them is literally all that they knew about the situation. This reminds me of Abraham and Abimelech, and him lying to Abimelech about his wife not being his wife. She's not my wife, she's my sister. And then God revealing to Abimelech the situation that he was in if he kept pursuing this other man's wife. Well, he didn't know. How was he going to know? Abraham lied to him about it. So God reveals information through, or sometimes revealed information through dreams, that these people had to do their very best to try to figure out what he was talking about, or how it applied to them, or whatever the situation was that they were involved in at the time. But this is just one example of how God gave them information. Sometimes it was by dreams, and then I have here in B, sometimes it was the Urim and the Thummim. The Urim and the Thummim. So let's go to Exodus chapter 20 and verse 30. Exodus 28 and verse 30. Thank you. John, would you read Exodus 28 and verse 30 for us, please?
And you shall put in the breastplate of judgment the Urim and the Thummim, and they shall be over Aaron's heart when he goes in before the Lord. So Aaron shall bear the judgment of the children of Israel over his heart before the Lord continually.
Okay, so this was something that was put in the high priest's breastplate. We don't know exactly what the Urim and the Thummim were, but they were some kind of a tool that God used in order to give information to the people that asked questions. People that, in this case, the high priest would have them over his heart, and they would be able to ask God a yes or no question, and they would use the Urim and the Thummim as a way for God to indicate to them either yes or no in a situation. So it was just another way for God to communicate with them when they needed specific information. When they could ask God a yes or a no question, they could pull out the Urim and the Thummim, and they'd be able to get a response from God. Now I have another reference here in 1 Samuel. Let's turn over to 1 Samuel 28 and verse 6. First Samuel 28 and verse 6. Thomas, it's good to have you with us tonight. I'm going to put you right to work. Would you like to read 1 Samuel 28 and verse 6 for us, please?
inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets.
Okay, so this is another indication of asking a specific question and God not communicating through those three means. God didn't give him what he needed to know through those three methods. Now, we know that when God gave the law of Moses to the Israelites, the Hebrew people, part of what they had to do was make the Ark of the Covenant. And in the Ark of the Covenant, they would put the tablets of stone that had the Ten Commandments written on them, a bowl or a container of manna, and Aaron's rod that budded. That Ark of the Covenant, the priests carried all the time they were walking through the wilderness. Those priests would load it up on their shoulders, and we know from studies that we made before, they traveled about 38 years wandering around in the wilderness after they received the information. And every place they went, the priests would have that Ark of the Covenant on their shoulders. It was taken with them everywhere they went. When they went into battle, the Ark of the Covenant, particularly under David's reign, the Ark of the Covenant went with them into battle, which would be an indication to those people that God was with them. It was stored in Shiloh for a while, and eventually David moved it to Jerusalem, and after Solomon built the temple, it was moved into the temple where it was set up permanently in the temple area. The Ark of the Covenant was with the nation of Israel for hundreds of years. And it was a center point, a focal point of their worship to God. We also know in the invasion of the Babylonians, they destroyed the temple and took all the treasures of the temple away. Everything that the Jews had in the temple, the Babylonians took, and most of it was never recovered. In fact, most of it's not even mentioned again in history. It's just gone. Wherever the Babylonians took it, it just disappeared. Not some Steven Spielberg thing, but it really did disappear. It was gone forever. But I think it fascinating, interesting, captivating, if you will, that this stuff has been gone for a very long time, ever since the Babylonians invaded and took the nation of Judah off into captivity. Yet when they were released, when they came out of Babylonian captivity and came back to the land of the Promised Land under Zerubbabel and Ezra and Nehemiah, one of the things they still had possession of was the Urim and Thummim. Let's go to the book of Ezra. That's right after 2nd Chronicles, for those of you that are hesitating. Ezra chapter 2. Let's read verse 63. Trishatha said unto them that they should not eat of the most holy thing till there stood up a priest with Urim and with Thummim. This is after their captivity, or at the end of their captivity. It appears they still had these two stones, or whatever they were, that was in Aaron's breastplate all the way back when God gave them the law back in the book of Exodus. All the way back then. They still had, they lost everything else, but these two stones that were in the breastplate were still available to them this many years later when they were out of captivity and back into the Promised Land. Just turn over a couple of pages to the book of Nehemiah. In Nehemiah chapter 7, in chapter 7 and verse 65. And then Trishatha said unto thee that they should not eat of the most holy thing till there stood up a priest with Urim and Thummim. So it was stated in Ezra, and then we know that Nehemiah came along years later, decades later, and he repeats the same thing in his book. So this is something that they still had possession of this many years later. So it's just one of those interesting things about the history of the Hebrew people and what they lost, and how they were able to hold on to some of these things. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I was reading my commentary. I don't know if you got one in the book.
No, sir.
The Urim and the Thummim.
Yeah.
When they want an answer from God,
Right.
one meant yes and one meant no.
Okay.
The Urim meant yes,
Okay.
and the Thummim meant no.
Okay. And I don't know how they were able to determine that, but that could be right. That very well could be right. I've always thought of the Urim and the Thummim maybe being more like dice. You take them out of the breastplate and you throw them down, and this is the answer God's going to give you. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it seems that there's something connected to that, because some places it just uses one of them, Urim. Sometimes they're used together, but they're always looking for an answer when they use them. Yes, sir?
You said Ezra, right?
Did I not? Did I say Ezra?
No. Before that.
Yes, I did say Ezra.
EZRA, right?
Yeah, EZRA, yes.
268?
No, 63 and then 65 in Nehemiah.
Because I had 263 in mine saying, and the governor said to them that they should not eat. Okay, let's look try it. You're good.
Okay.
Mine has extra verbiage in there.
Okay. What version is that?
King James.
That's what I read from. Okay, well anyway, I just wanted to point that out, that
King
even,
James.
glad we cleared that up. Sometimes we think of them in Hebrew history of losing everything that God gave them when they were taken into captivity, and they did. They lost everything that was in the temple. For some reason, some way, they were able to secure or maybe hide the Urim and Thummim. If they are indeed stones, little dice-like things, it wouldn't be difficult to hide those. So it'd be pretty difficult to hide the Ark of the Covenant or the tables of showbread or those kind of things. But it would be pretty simple, I think, to hide the Urim and the Thummim, and that's probably why they were able to hold on to them, and how they passed them from generation to generation, even in captivity, so they could have some glimmer of hope that God had given them. I don't even know if they were able to use them when they were in Babylonian captivity, but they held on to them while they were in Babylonian captivity. And I thought that in itself was pretty interesting, that these people that had violated all of God's rules and done everything they could to bring God's wrath upon them still felt like they were close enough to God to hide some of his treasures and use them later on in their release. Okay, yes?
In your research, because I was trying to look at there's no evidence of what they actually were, like if they were just stone, because I mean, in the pictures, there's a bunch of different things if you like Google what is, or are, excuse me. There's some that look like little, like glasses almost, like with triangles in them, and there's little ones that are stones. There's nowhere that shows what they were that you found.
Well, we got a couple of disadvantages here when we're trying to do research like that. Obviously, there's no pictures.
Yeah.
So, and because it was so ancient, there probably wasn't any paintings that were preserved either. So it's mostly a guess. But I think the idea of stones are right, because it uses the reference to stones when it's talking about Aaron's breastplate. So there was an adorning on his outer breastplate that represented the 12 tribes, and it appears that these stones were hidden somewhere inside, because it specifically states over his heart. So there may have been a pouch worked into the inside of the breastplate that was a special place that, because Aaron was the high priest and he was the spiritual leader of an entire nation, he had a connection with God, and that kept those stones, those questions he could ask God specifically, real close to him. So, and I think that's kind of why they were able to secure these even in captivity, is because they were small, maybe like a stone, but they were able to be kept out of sight. Because I'm sure the breastplate was taken because it was adorned and it was beautiful and it was big enough to fit over the high priest's breast. I mean, it covered his chest. And some people even think it went on the back as well, front and back. So it would have been very difficult to hide that. If it pulled 2 stones out that were portable, movable,
Right.
slip them in your pocket or in the lining of your tunic or whatever, that'd have been a pretty simple thing to do. So we have a disadvantage. There's no pictures or paintings. We have a lot of circumstantial information that kind of leads me to think that they were some kind of a stone or maybe some kind of a double, triple-sided dice that they could throw out and get an answer.
Yeah, 'cause I saw a bunch that had like, lettering on them
Yeah.
and things like that.
And I don't know. There's just no way for me to know. But there's got to be something. Of course, it could be way off. But that's what I'm thinking. Is it's probably got something to do with that type of thing. Yes, Henry?
You said Aaron had 12 stones in his house.
Did he not
12 tribes?
do what? Okay, 12 stones.
Yeah, that's 12 tribes.
That's what I said. Is that right?
I was wondering, would that be in relation to Joshua looking at 12 stones in the River Jordan?
Well,
They represented 12 tribes too.
you did. In fact, it specifically stated that one person from each tribe had to pick up a stone. So yes, I don't know if it's a correlation or a connection or not, but God liked the idea of them remembering that there was a family of 12 tribes. So I don't know if, and did somebody look that up in Aaron's breastplate? Was it 12 stones? I hate to get that basic thing wrong in our discussion. Surely somebody can look it up, right?
Well,
But did
what I'm reading here, it was the ephod was called.
Yeah. That was the covering, yeah.
That was the cover, it was somewhere inside there.
Right, that's the Urim and Thummim, yes.
Yeah.
But didn't his ephod or his breastplate have 12 stones? Or am I just making that up as we go along here? Harvey?
Okay, I'm looking it up here, it has different things here. In the Hebrew language, the Urim and Thummim, ancient stones of divination.
Right.
It says Urim and Thummim stones were used by the Hebrews high priest for divination, the act of seeking knowledge through indirect means from God. Urim, white, translates to curse, fault, guilt, or no.
Okay.
Aaron, black, translates to light, truth, innocence, or yes.
Okay. So according to that, they could have been one side white, one side black, and 2 of them being used or something of that nature. Even from that, we don't know for sure. Did anybody come up with the breastplate? How many stones are in
It
it?
says 12 gemstones.
Okay, 12 gemstones, okay. I thought it did, but, I'm old and my mind goes sometimes. But these were 2 special stones. These were 2 other stones that the high priest was able to use, and it looks like these stones were used in a lot of additional eras, additional times after Aaron's situation with that ephod or breastplate that he had at the time. So these are important things, and it's one of the ways God communicated. Yes, sir.
Not to be presumptive of it, but if you had 12 stones for the different, nations, and if 12 different tribes, you would assume that you would have the Urim and Thummim would be all 3 stones.
Yes.
Yes.
That's an assumption, yes. But it even says that there's stones, I think, that fit in over his heart. So
Yeah.
I don't think it's an assumption to say they're stones. It's an assumption on what they might look like, or how they functioned, or if they were flat or cubical, or we don't know what they were, or even how they work. We don't know. We know we got yes and no, but we don't know how the stones themselves work. So it's difficult for us this many years removed to come up with some concrete things, but this is one of the things that causes me never to get done studying. I've always got to know more, got to learn more. There's got to be some information out there, so it keeps me going. I know that. Hopefully, it will you too, to try to find some answers to some of these things. But the point is that God communicated in a lot of different ways, a lot of different processes that He went through. Sometimes it was in the written words. Sometimes He communicated through what you have in your hand, the written word. Let's look at Exodus 31:18. This is a reference to God communicating through the tablets that He had, through His tablets. Exodus 31:18. Susan, would you read Exodus 31:18, please?
And he gave unto Moses what he had made of it. Verse 24.
he got information recorded on tablets there. 1 Kings chapter 2 and verse 3 will be a reference to the law of Moses and how he communicated. 1 Kings 2 and verse 3. We'll stay right there in that pew and ask Bella to read that one.
And keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn.
Okay, so it's written in the law. So this is not the oral law that God gave Moses. It is the oral law that God gave Moses, but this is the information that was recorded because of what God gave Moses. So this is the law that Moses had. And Sonia, since we'll stay right there, would you read Psalm 40 and verse 7?
Then said I, Lo, I come, the volume of the book which is written.
The volume of the book. So sometimes God communicated through written information. And aren't we thankful we got written information? We don't have to go through the processes that they went through. We got something that's much more convenient. Sometimes in voices. Let's go back to Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 23. Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 23. Harvey, would you read that verse for us, please?
Deuteronomy 5 and verse
23.
Okay. So it was when you heard the voice in the midst of the darkness, while the mountain was burning with fire, that you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders.
Okay, so we hear voices in the midst of darkness. There was a vision that took place. There are voices, rather, that took place, and visions is the next one. Sometimes in visions, a revelation of information. Beverly, would you read Job 33, 14 and 15, please?
Indeed, God speaks once or twice, yet no one notices it. In a dream, a vision of the night, when sound asleep, falls on men, while they slumber in their beds.
Okay, so in a dream, in a vision, there's lots of ways for God to communicate. And there's lots of ways that God did communicate. And then the sixth one is sometimes in symbols. For example, the rod of an almond tree and the seething pot. Very interesting section of scripture there. Paul, could I get you to read Jeremiah 1, 11 through 14, please?
Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Jeremiah, what seest thou? And I said, I see a rod of an almond tree. Then said the Lord unto me, thou hast well seen, for I will hasten my word to perform it. And the word of the Lord came unto me the second time, saying, what seest thou? And I said, I see a seething pot, and the face thereof is toward the north.
And the face thereof is towards the north. The information in Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 11 and 14 indicate that something's going to happen swiftly and something's going to take place from the north. The pot was turned to the north. Do you know what happened 20 years after this prophecy was recorded? The Babylonian Empire invaded Judah from the north. Just 20 years later, Jeremiah prophesied something's going to happen swiftly, and it's going to come from the north. And the Babylonians invaded north to south and took the southern kingdom captive. Yes, Mike?
You have the King James Version. Would you read 13 again, that very last section about the seed of life?
In Jeremiah 1?
Yes.
Well, Paul read it first. You want Paul to read it again? He read it in the King
Well,
James
the
Version.
reason I heard that it is facing to the north, but my New King James says it is facing away from the north.
The King James says, it's actually a question and then a statement. The first part of 13 says, and the word of the Lord came unto me the second time, saying, what seest thou? And then the answer to the question is, and I said, I see a seething pot, and the face thereof is towards the north.
Okay, so the New King James says it is facing away from the north.
Yep.
I'm telling you, man, get the King James Version. I don't know why they translated it that way. I didn't notice that when I was studying for this. I didn't put the away together. That seems to be a contradiction, so I'll have to try to figure out what was going on there. But I do know that they were invaded from the north, and there's a lot of references to things going on in the north in the prophecies, and even people today that have a misguided conception of the end of time keep talking about invasion from the north, and they were even talking about Russia being the one that invaded from the north, the Holy Lands and things of that nature.
Get away from the north, right?
Yeah.
Pardon me?
That's my King James Version said, mine says the same thing.
Says what?
Away from the north.
Away from north. Okay, I'll check that out. If I don't get back to you on that, Mike, remind me that I have to say something about it, because I will check it out during the
It's as if God is correcting him on the direction in which he is seeing, which Jeremiah himself is seeing. And God's correcting him. He said, no, it's coming, it's away from the north. But you see it till the north.
Okay, away from the north, meaning out of the north?
Right.
Okay.
It's like God
It
correcting
may
him.
be. I'll find out for you, Mike. One of those interesting things that I like to do anyway, so that won't be a problem at all. It would be better if we all used the same version, because we'd all see the same thing, but that's never going to happen. So we'll just do the best we can, and I will try to have an answer on that next week. I don't use the New King James Version, but I always check the New King James Version, because I know so many of you use it, but I don't know how that slipped by me without me even noticing that, but I will try to have an answer for you next week.
Well, you're correct in that the problem came from the north, because verse 14 says, out of the north, calamity shall break forth.
Right.
So, it's like you said, it seems like a little controversy.
Yeah.
What is the answer?
Right. Well, verse 13 is supposed to represent the turning of the pot towards the trouble. You always have a face on your pots, probably where the handle fits, or maybe the spoon fits, or whatever it might be. You always have a point of reference on your pot, and the reference was towards the north from what I was able to study. But I'll check it out, see if I can come up with a solid and concrete answer for that. But I do appreciate you pointing that out, because I didn't notice that when I was preparing. Yes, sir.
I got, this one has all the versions right here. It
Yes,
says,
sir.
English Standard Version, the word Lord came to me the second time and said, what do you see? And he said, I see a boiling pot facing away from the north. King James Version, and the Lord came unto me the second time saying, what seest thou? And I said, I see a seething pot, and the face thereof is towards the north.
Okay.
So it's saying the same thing. The King James is saying towards the north.
Right.
And the other one is saying, it is tilted towards us from the north.
From the north. Okay.
Yeah, so,
Okay. Well, I'll still do what I can to check out the original language.
I mean, it's showing the same thing in different
But
words.
I can also see where it's very confusing to read it. It doesn't add up very well, so I can see the confusion. It's obvious to me there's some confusion there. We ran out of time. So Lord willing, we'll pick up on point G, because there's that last one we need to discuss, because G is a reference to sometimes God speaks through nature. And in our studies in Romans chapter 1, a very large portion of Romans chapter 1 dealt with God's ability to reveal himself through the natural world. So we're going to take some time to look at that. Yes, sir?
Well, I was going to say, because you said something at the beginning. The way I look at it, I don't care who pinned New Testament. I look at the Holy Spirit being the author.
Yes.
So that's how I always look at it. Not Paul, Peter, James, whatever. The Holy Spirit being the author.
Okay, I'll see you next week.